going to be about adoption. So we're going to cover three things: timeline, the guidance from MRC, the integration, validation, compliance. A little bit about that. So I'll start right away with the timeline. Brad, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you, Shaley. So to quickly recap, adoption of the OM SDK is voluntary. Though in adopting, participants do help streamline how measurement data is gathered while also reducing discrepancies in the process. Now, measurement providers, for their part, can go about getting the necessary inputs they need for their services more efficiently, which allows these providers to focus more intently on transforming measurement data to insight. With improved coverage rates on measurement, there is every reason to expect that we will see a virtuous effect on buyer confidence, which gives buyers the reassurance they need to transact on quality placements. And with buyers more confident to transact on quality inventory, the benefits are likely to flow to publishers and ultimately to users as well. Now, in terms of the timeline, we encourage implementing the OM SDK at the earliest opportunity, and we hope that this session has been helpful in showing you how to do that. For buyers and sellers looking to leverage viewable impression measurement in time for Q4, we suggest that these buyers and sellers require their partners to integrate OM SDK support by September 30th. Now, this will allow ample time for testing, iterating, and so on to be able to be fully live by the holidays without risk of impact by holiday code freezes and so on. So buyers and sellers who are ready sooner are, of course, encouraged to go live sooner. Remember, ultimately, that the timeline you follow is, of course, your own, although we are encouraging the ecosystem to adopt open measurement at earliest opportunity once again.
Thank you, Brad. MRC guidance. So we have Ron from MRC here to talk about that. Ron?
Shaley, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So thanks. So this is Ron with the MRC. I've also got George Ivey with me. He'll correct me if I run astray or also help in answering questions at the end. But I just wanted to give a quick overview about how this intersects with the MRC audit and accreditation process. The first thing I wanted to say at the outset was that, as I believe Joe from IAS said at the beginning of this presentation, MRC has been a longtime supporter of this initiative, even of the idea of it. It's something that was discussed in 2016 when we were setting the mobile viewability guidelines, when there was this push and pull between whether there should be a mandated API signal or SDK. And we wrote the guidelines with both in mind. But as Joe pointed out and quoted, we highly encouraged an industry effort to have a single source SDK to make adoption easier for publishers and app developers. And we continue to see the very important need for this as we're doing mobile viewability audits, particularly with in-app, as we see lower measured rates because of slow SDK adoption, at least proprietary SDK adoption, where publishers and app developers are hesitant to adopt proprietary SDKs for fear that they'll have to do that multiple times. And this solves that. So MRC remains a very strong, staunch supporter of OM SDK. That said, we do anticipate that we'll have to conduct some procedures at the vendors in order to include use of OM SDK in the accredited viewability suite at vendors. The good news is, and there's several pieces of good news here, is we already have the requirements baked into the mobile viewability guidelines. As Joe mentioned, we thought about this a number of years ago, that this would be an eventuality. So we do have what we would be expecting from an audit standpoint. It's going to vary depending on the vendor. So a number of presenters just went through different types of implementations of the OM SDK, different aspects within particular creatives, certain functionality that may be future state. So we do anticipate that there may be differential use of the OM SDK at vendors, whether they use it on a standalone basis or integrate it with other measurement. So depending on that, there may be some differences in what we need to do. But we have told all vendors that until we've actually looked at this, they should hold it out as unaccredited and unaudited until our auditors have gone in and done it. The basic premise of what we're looking for is really just that the vendors have processes to ensure that if they're ingesting and accepting OM SDK signals, that they have a process to say that they've done some additional or some initial onboarding to make sure that it's been implemented properly. We talked about things like versioning earlier. It's got the right version. The code is correct, etc. We are fully aware that the Tech Lab has a certification program, and we've had our auditors liaise with the IAB Tech Lab to ensure that they get comfort with that. So if a vendor is going to be reliant on the IAB Tech Lab certification before they onboard a publisher or an app, that we understand what that is, and that can obviate some of that testing. But then we're also going to need to ensure that there's periodic and ongoing checking, because there can be changes, there can be errors, there can be different versions. We want to make sure that the ingestion of that data goes through the audited systems that we've already put our hands on, and that there's no custom systems that we haven't previously audited. We want to make sure that the reporting is consistent, as well as the required application of IVT. And finally, we want to take a look at measured rate and coverage, because anybody that's gone through the MRC accreditation and audit process before knows that that's a key concern of viewability measurement. The good news is we've talked to our auditors and we said, well, how long do you anticipate this will take? The auditors have said it's about a week or two of effort. So we're not talking an elongated project. There does need to be some procedures that the auditors need to do at the vendors. But in the grand scheme of things, it's relatively brief and concise. What we would then do is, once the auditors have done that, and this could be done either as part of the ongoing required annual audits at the vendors, but if that's far out, that's not happening for some time, there is some one-off accelerated testing that the auditors can do to get this done sooner, so there doesn't have to be a disclaimer. And what we would essentially say is that once we've done that and there's been no issues and we're assured that there's a process in place, and then it's being used as intended, that the vendor's viewability accreditation in-app would include use of the OM SDK, much like we've done with things like MRate in the past, where there's required QC. So that's the gist of what I wanted to cover. With that, I guess I'll hand it over to the next presenter.
Yeah. Thank you, Ron. Moving to the next is the roadmap, which will be covered by Michael from Oracle Mode. But just before that, I just wanted to say for 1 minute about the compliance. I didn't prepare a specific slide for that. This is a voluntary program offered by IAB Tech Lab. What we do is we take the integrated app and with your ads being served in it, and then we run it through our standard testing process. We've created about 90 plus tests to make sure that we are getting all the events and all your integration is properly working. And this certification ensures that your integration is going to work fine with all the vendor or measurement provider verification tags. So that's just a brief intro to that compliance. You can write to compliance@iabtechlab.com for more details. With that, I'll hand it over to Michael for the roadmap.
All right, thanks, Joey. So the question of what comes next. One of the topics that is, I would say, at the forefront is the question of where is the Open Measurement SDK supported? Starting out, we are just looking at iOS and Android apps. Moving into Q2, one of the primary concerns is getting both desktop and mobile web support up and running. And then in future quarters, addressing additional environments such as Windows apps, OTT or set-top devices, and anything else that may crop up in the future. And hard timelines and detailed support are, of course, TBD on that. But one thing that we do have, or we should have some additional information on coming up in Q2, is some of the technical changes expected in the near future. And Shelley, if you could move to the next slide. So breaking this down into just a quick sneak peek on some of these. And again, the final prioritization list here is still to be confirmed, but some of the things that have already been proposed are, from the invalid traffic perspective, both general and sophisticated invalid traffic support. Now, both GIVT and SIVT via existing vendor methods should already be available, but the dev note here is in particular for any app-specific signals that could allow vendors to track additional SIVT methodologies that might not be available without those signals from the Open Measurement SDK. From a performance perspective, performance is always a critical question, but it's particularly important here just because any introduced latency as a result of adding the Open Measurement SDK that might impact key attention metrics from the served ad is something that we want to minimize to the greatest degree possible. In addition to standard internal refactors for just maintainability of the code base and continued improvements and rollouts in the future. Viewability being the core feature here, there are a few additional items of support coming into that, whether that be better debugging and more detailed reporting for reasons why an ad might not be viewable, support for the MRC auditability standard, providing measurement signals directly to the publisher client without needing to go through a verification vendor script, and continuous view time directly via the Open Measurement, via OMIT. As far as encryption and security, that's one where I think one of the critical features is going to be kind of a handshake or safety verification, just to make sure that any vendor scripts running can say, yes, this is coming from an actual OMIT integration. It's legitimate. It's unspoofed. Essentially saying that we don't think this is being hijacked and coming from just kind of any arbitrary signal. In addition to that, looking into expanding safeguards against any API abuse to generate errant data, whether that's via accidental or intentional publisher integration. And as well, having a full stack automated testing suite for all of the different components, native, JS client, just to confirm functionality and ensure trust in the validity of the OM SDK signals as future versions are launched, and to make sure that there are no errors in regression testing. Brand safety is one where kind of the question at the forefront of a lot of minds is blocking and VPAID support, which in the initial version is not going to be fully supported, but both server-side blocking and verification vendor script blocking are expected to be worked out to some degree. In addition, providing an app category signal to the verification scripts for app section whitelisting or blacklisting is part of the proposal there. On the audience and reach perspective, I think that the main point there is just making sure device ID, user ID is available for audience and reach reporting per compliance with GDPR. And then various and sundry other features, whether that's some of the OpenRTB bitstream support for OMID capability, just to help the transition from VPAID to OMID, or for better native ad support, defining a standard field in the RTB responses for the vendor key and verification parameters, just for easier programmatic injection of the verification scripts, and a proposal to write out a Swift version of the iOS SDK for better performance and easier adoption for apps coded in Swift. And this is far from an exhaustive list, but kind of the current state of the extant proposals. And I think that kind of wraps it up. So back to you, Shaylee, for last thoughts.